I'm holding the escrow cancellation notice when it hits me. 3 years. 3 years of double shifts, skipped vacations, and protein bars for dinner. And it all came down to one phone call I made from a hospital bed. Let me back up. My name is Sierra. I'm 31. I work in nursing. Nights mostly, at a regional hospital outside Columbus. And for the past 3 years, I have been the only thing standing between my younger brother and a financial cliff he kept cheerfully walking toward. My brother's name is Owen. He's 27, sweet-faced, and has always been the kind of person who believes things will work out, because they always have. And they always have because, for most of his life, I made sure they did. Our mom died when I was 26, and Owen was 22. Pancreatic cancer, fast and brutal. She was gone in 4 months from diagnosis. And the last week, when she was mostly sleeping and the painkillers had blurred everything soft, she held my hand and said, "Look after him. You know how he is." I said yes. Of course I said yes. I would have promised her anything in that room. I didn't fully understand what I was agreeing to. Owen is not a bad person. I want to be clear about that, because I've spent a lot of time these past several months making sure I'm not painting him as a villain, when he's more of a person who never learned that money has weight. Our dad left when we were little. Mom worked 2 jobs. She wanted better for Owen, maybe overcompensated, maybe shielded him from the hard math of things. By the time she died, Owen had never paid a utility bill, never negotiated a lease, never sat across from someone and said, "I can't afford that." I had, many times. So when he graduated with his communications degree and took an entry-level marketing job that paid $38,000 a year and his rent was $1,200 a month, and he kept calling me asking if I could spot him until payday, I said yes. Because of what I promised. Because of what she'd asked. The first year, I gave him maybe $4,000 total. Small amounts. Rent gaps. A car repair. His security deposit when he moved apartments. I told myself it was temporary. He was just finding his footing. Then he met Felicity. I remember the first time he brought her to dinner. This was about 18 months after Mom died, and she was polished in that specific way that makes you feel underdressed in your own home. Everything about her was a little too deliberate. The way she set her purse on the table instead of the floor. The way she glanced around my apartment and said, "Oh, this is cozy," with a smile that suggested cozy was not entirely a compliment. Owen looked at her like she was handing him a map to a better version of his life. I tried. I genuinely tried to like her. We went to dinner a few times, the 3 of us. She was funny sometimes, and she clearly adored Owen in her own way. But there was a quality to her that I couldn't shake, a way she had of mentioning things she wanted, as though they were things that simply would happen, not requests, announcements. The house came up about 8 months into their relationship. Owen called me on a Tuesday night, excited in that uncontained way he gets, and said they were thinking about buying a place. Something in Westerville. Good schools, nice neighborhood, the kind of place you build a life in. I said that sounded great. Asked what they were pre-approved for. He got a little quiet. Said the numbers were complicated. Said Felicity had some student loan debt that was affecting her credit score, and he hadn't been at his current job long enough to qualify for the loan size they wanted a loan. But here's the thing, he said. If you co-signed, we'd qualify easily. Your credit is incredible. You're a nurse. You have stable income. The bank loves you. I should have said no right then. I didn't, because Mom's voice was still in my ear, and Owen sounded so hopeful, and I told myself this was a one-time thing, a signature on paper. Not really money. What I did not understand, what I understood later, too late, is that co-signing a $340,000 mortgage is not a signature. It is your entire financial identity handed to someone else to use as collateral. The house they chose was nice, more than nice. 4 bedrooms in a new construction development, with a 2-car garage, and a kitchen that had a waterfall quartz countertop that Felicity described as non-negotiable. The base price was $340,000. But Felicity had upgrades in mind. The first upgrade conversation happened over coffee at their kitchen table. They were renting an apartment then, signing the build contract, and she had printed out a spreadsheet, an actual spreadsheet, with columns. I looked at it and felt my vision go slightly narrow. Hardwood throughout, $8,000. Upgraded appliance package, $6,000. Extended primary bathroom with double vanity and soaking tub, $11,000. Finished basement, $22,000. These aren't extravagances, she said, in the tone of someone explaining something obvious. These are value adds. You want the house to have resale value, don't you, Sarah? I looked at Owen. He was nodding. I said I wasn't sure they needed the finished basement right away. She said the builder was offering a discount for bundling upgrades during the contract phase. I said I still wasn't sure. She tilted her head slightly and said, I just think if we're going to do this, we should do it right, as if it were my money going into her waterfall countertop. I said I'd think about it. What I actually did was call my friend Patrice that night and say, something feels wrong, and Patrice, who has known me since nursing school and has seen me at my worst and best, said, trust that feeling, Sarah. I didn't listen well enough. Over the next several months, while the house was being built, I gave them another $9,000 for incidental costs. That's what Owen called them. Incidentals, a survey fee. Builder fees that were apparently standard but not included in the original quote. The earnest money, $41,000, which Owen said he'd pay half of, but then came back 2 weeks later and said he only had $6,000 liquid. Could I cover the rest? He'd pay me back. I covered it. I started picking up extra shifts to do it. Night shifts on weekends, double shifts when they were available. I was running on 4 hours of sleep and telling myself I was doing the right thing. I was honoring my mother. Felicity, meanwhile, had quit her job at the marketing firm. She told Owen, and Owen told me, that she was going to start a lifestyle brand. An Instagram and YouTube presence centered around home design and intentional living. She had a ring light. She had a content calendar. She had zero income for the foreseeable future. Owen's salary had gone up slightly. He was at $44,000 now, but with the mortgage payment, their utilities, Felicity's content creation expenses, she needed a new camera, she needed props, she needed a backdrop. They were stretched. And when they were stretched, Owen called me. I started to say no more often. I'd say, I can't right now. Things are tight for me too. Owen would get quiet and a little wounded and say he understood. And then 3 days later, Felicity would text me something chatty and casual that ended with, oh, by the way, did Owen mention we're a little short this month? Just wanted to make sure you two talked. She never asked directly. She always made it look like Owen's conversation to have. And then she'd remind me it hadn't been had. It was suffocating. Slow and polite and suffocating. The moment that I think cracked something in me happened about 4 months before the house was scheduled to close. I drove out to the construction site with Owen on a Saturday because he wanted to do a walkthrough of the progress. Felicity came too. We were standing in the unfinished backyard, which was essentially a flat, muddy rectangle with a lot of potential and absolutely nothing else. And Felicity was describing in detail where she was going to put a pergola and a fire pit and a small water feature. And we should really see about extending the patio, she said. I saw a version with stamped concrete and a built-in grill station that would be perfect. We could probably get it done before they pour the main slab. I said very evenly, that costs money, Felicity. She said, everything costs money, Sarah. And then she laughed, lightly, like I'd made a joke. I said, I'm serious. I can't keep. She turned and walked a few steps toward the house frame, pointing something out to Owen about the window placement, and the conversation just ended. She ended it by turning away, like my voice had stopped being relevant. Owen followed her, and I stood in the mud in my good shoes, and something in my chest went very, very still. The closing date was set for a Thursday in March. 2 days before, I was working a night shift, Wednesday into Thursday, and at around 2 a.m, I got a call from Owen. He said Felicity had been in a car accident. Minor, he said. Everyone was okay, but she was shaken and needed to see me. They were at the house site, they'd been driving past it, and she'd wanted to stop. I should have asked more questions. I was tired, I was worried, I drove out. The site was mostly finished. The house was standing, windows in, just waiting for the final walkthrough inspection before closing. It was dark, and the workers were long gone, and I pulled up to see Owen's car and Felicity standing outside, apparently fine. No visible injury, not sitting down, not on the phone with insurance, just there, arms crossed, waiting. I got out and said, "Are you okay?" She said, "I need you to add an addendum to the mortgage." I looked into it, and with your credit, you can increase the loan amount to cover the backyard work and the patio. We'd only need to pull another $30,000. I stood there for a moment. I said, "You called me out here at 2 a.m. to ask me to take on $30,000 more debt for your patio. She said, it's not just the patio. It's the whole outdoor living space. It's an investment. I said no, clearly. No, and something shifted in her face. The politeness went out like a light, and what was underneath was not pretty. She said I was selfish. She said I'd been holding them back this entire time. She said she'd done the math, and I owed them more than I thought for emotional support and family contribution, and that I'd been taking advantage of their goodwill. I genuinely laughed. It came out before I could stop it. Not a mean laugh, just a stunned one. And I said, Felicity, I've given you almost $60,000. And she said, that's not what I'm talking about. And then things happened very fast. She was standing close to me, and I took a step back, and my heel caught a piece of framing lumber that was lying flat on the ground near the foundation edge, and I went down. Hard. My right arm hit the edge of a concrete form, and my head caught the corner of a low wooden sawhorse that was just there, sitting in the dark where it shouldn't have been. I don't know how long I was on the ground. It couldn't have been more than a few seconds. I remember the cold of the mud on my hands, and blood warm above my eyebrow, and the specific sound of gravel under Felicity's shoes as she stepped back. And then Owen's car, with him in it, started and drove away. They left me there. I called 911 myself, lying in the mud of the house I had signed my name onto, with blood getting in my eye and my arm bent in a way it shouldn't be. The dispatcher stayed on the line. She was calm and she talked to me about her shift until the ambulance came, and I have thought about her many times since. The ER was 3 hours. Fractured radius, the smaller bone in my forearm, 7 stitches above my eyebrow, a mild concussion that made the fluorescent lights feel like small explosions. I had to call Patrice from the hospital to come get me, because Owen did not answer my calls. At 6 a.m., he texted me. Felicity said you got aggressive and fell. We need space from the drama. Please don't contact us for a while. I read it 4 times, and then, from my hospital bed, with my arm in a temporary splint and a bandage on my face, I picked up my phone and called the mortgage company. I had not signed the final closing documents yet. The closing was that morning. I had been scheduled to be there at 10. I told the loan officer my situation had changed and I was withdrawing as co-borrower. I said I wanted to be removed from the loan entirely. She said if I withdrew, the loan as currently structured would not close. Owen's income and credit alone would not qualify him for the approved amount. I said I understood. She said the earnest money, the $41,000 I had largely funded, would be forfeited under the contract terms since the buyer was unable to close. I said, I understand. Please proceed. Then I called my hospital's HR department and reported that I would need medical leave for my arm, at least 2 weeks, possibly 4. That was a real consequence. I lost wages, real wages, while my arm healed. Then I took a photograph of my discharge papers, the arm, the stitches, the formal medical record of what had happened the night before closing on a house I had spent 3 years making possible, and I sent it to every member of my extended family in a single group email. Owen's aunt, my mother's sister, 3 cousins, our grandfather who was 81 and was going to be invited to the housewarming. I did not editorialize. I did not call anyone names. I attached the photo and wrote, I wanted the family to know why I was unable to attend the closing today and why I have withdrawn from the mortgage. I'm recovering from a fractured arm and a concussion sustained the night before closing. Owen left the scene. I called 911 alone. Then I put my phone face down and slept. I woke up to 67 messages. Owen had called 11 times. Felicity had called twice, which told me something, because she'd been very careful never to ask me for anything directly. My aunt had left a 6-minute voicemail. My grandfather, who texts in all caps and 1 sentence at a time, had sent 4 messages. The last one said, call me. PRU'd of you. I didn't talk to Owen for 3 days. When I did finally pick up his call, he was crying. He said Felicity had told him I tripped on my own. He said he hadn't known how bad it was. He said he was sorry. I said, Owen. She called me out there at 2 a.m. to demand $30,000. When I said no, she got in my face. I fell backward and I was bleeding on the ground, and you drove away. He was quiet for a long time, and then he said, she said it wasn't that bad. I said, I have 7 stitches and a broken arm. I have the discharge papers. Another silence. I said, I love you. I have loved you through everything since Mom died. But I am not doing this anymore. I am not a source of funding. I am your sister, and what happened on that site was not okay. And if you can't see that clearly yet, then you need to take some time and get there on your own." I hung up. The $41,000 is gone. I know that. I've accepted it, mostly, the way you accept scar tissue. It's there. It doesn't move. You learn to work around it. My attorney says I have a viable personal injury claim against Felicity for the medical costs and lost wages, and we are actively pursuing it. She has been formally notified. Owen and Felicity are still together, as far as I know. They're renting somewhere. I don't know the details, and I stopped needing to. What I know is this. I have Patrice, who drove to the ER at 4 in the morning without being asked twice. I have 2 colleagues from work who brought me groceries during my medical leave and sat on my couch and watched bad reality television with me while my arm healed. I have my grandfather, who called me the week after everything happened and said, "Your mother asked you to look after him, baby. She did not ask you to disappear." I've been thinking about that a lot. I looked after Owen for 3 years. I gave him money. I worked nights to earn. I signed my name onto a loan that required his success to protect mine. I showed up to a dark construction site at 2 in the morning because I thought he needed me. I did look after him. What my mother couldn't have known, what none of us know when we make promises in hospital rooms, is that looking after someone and funding them are not the same thing. That sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop filling in the gaps so they finally feel the shape of their own choices. I have a small apartment. It's genuinely cozy, no quotation marks needed. My arm is mostly healed, the scar above my eyebrow is fading. Some mornings I wake up and the grief of it all, the lost money, the lost version of my brother I was holding on to, the mother who asked me to promise something she thought was simple, comes in full and sits on my chest for a while. I let it. And then I get up. I have a morning shift tomorrow. I have a fridge full of food I bought for myself with money I earned that no one else has a claim on. That is not a small thing. That is actually everything. I've been thinking about cause and effect a lot lately. Not in a cosmic way. I'm not someone who believes the universe is keeping score, but in the very plain, very human way, where you trace a line backward and you can see exactly where each thing led to the next. Felicity did not lose that house because I am a vengeful person. She lost it because she spent 3 years treating someone's generosity as a structural material, something to build on, something load-bearing, and she never once considered what would happen if that person simply walked away. That's not punishment. That's physics. And Owen, I've sat with Owen a long time in my head. He is not a monster. He is someone who learned, somewhere along the way, to outsource the hard parts of his life. First to our mother, then to me, and then, I think, to Felicity's very certain version of who he should be. That's its own kind of trap. I feel for him genuinely, even now. But feeling for someone is not the same as handing them your financial future and hoping they'll be careful with it. I confused those two things for 3 years. What I know now, and I wish I'd known earlier, though I'm not sure I would have believed it, is that you cannot care for someone more than they are willing to care for themselves and still call it love. At some point, it tips over into something else. Something that looks like devotion but functions like enabling. Something that says, I will keep filling this hole, instead of asking why the hole keeps getting dug. My mother was a good woman. She worked herself to exhaustion to give us stability. And in her last days, she was afraid for Owen the same way she'd always been afraid for Owen. And she asked me to look out for him. I don't think she was wrong to ask. I think she was scared and she trusted me because I have always been the one who figures things out. But I've come to understand that her fear was not a blueprint. It was a feeling. And I took that feeling and built 3 years of financial sacrifice around it, and no one ever asked me if that was okay. That's on me, partly, not as blame. Blame is too heavy and too simple, but as information. I am someone who will honor a promise past the point of sense. I am someone who would rather absorb a cost than watch someone I love face a consequence. Those are not bad qualities. They are qualities that need edges. They need the word no, and they need a person willing to say it. I said it. Finally, in the dark construction site at 2 in the morning, and it cost me 7 stitches and a broken arm. But the cost of not saying it had already been 3 years of double shifts and borrowed sleep, and the slow, quiet loss of my own financial safety. The arm healed. The account is rebuilding. The scar above my eyebrow is almost gone. What I am keeping, deliberately, is the clarity. The knowledge that my labor has value, that my name on a document means something, that love is not a blank check and a deathbed promise is not a lifetime sentence. Patrice told me, the week I got out of the hospital, that I was going to be fine. I said I knew. She said, no, I mean actually fine, like better than before. And I think she was right. There's something on the other side of this. Some version of me that doesn't flinch when her phone rings, doesn't mentally calculate whether she can afford to say yes before she's even heard the question. That version of me has a full fridge and a paid rent and a morning shift she's actually looking forward to. That's enough. That is, honestly, more than enough.